So yeah, this session, we've heard a lot about the alternatives. I think we've also alluded a lot now to sort of resident engagement, but so we're going to go more into that. There is the sense that there are a lot of alternatives, that we need to take our time. We need to take 3 years or so. That's our template to make change happen. But yeah, a key factor that again we've alluded to it, but that's really what we're going to go into, is very much working with residents and trying to counter all the complaints that I know a lot of councillors sort of have, that fear of complaints from residents that are going to come up. And we have found in rare cases that those complaints have actually led to sort of a panic return to using pesticides as a sort of solution. So today is sort of about navigating that and how can you avoid that happening. So again, taking your time, really having a plan is part of that. And part of that plan, as we've said, is very much thinking of how you can communicate. And there are 2 sides to that. I think, again, it can be a mentality shift. It can be about accepting more weeds. That's sort of up to you of how you want your council to make that change happen. It can very much be, completely more around biodiversity. It can be more, I think Hammersmith and Fulham actually is quite a good example of somewhere that has decided to do things a bit more top-down and just say to residents, it's going to be clear and not have that much there for biodiversity. That's not their main goal. But more and more councils are looking to do things for biodiversity. A key factor in that is working with people. And I think anyway, even if you are going to change things overnight, or if you are looking to have a very neat and tidy council, which again isn't particularly what we advise, but fair enough if that's what you want to do, there are still going to be growing pains. There are still going to be moments where you're trialing things, you're figuring things out, and there will probably be more weeds. And I guess the other side of that is that it's a shame not to share with residents. I'll say that again in the conclusion, but it's a real benefit that you're doing, actually, as we've said, protecting residents, protecting workers, increasing biodiversity. There's a real, you're losing out if you're not actually residents. And so quickly, before we go into a case study, what we mean by engaging with residents, I think there's sort of a dual aspect to that. There's communicating, there's very much sharing what you're doing, that's on your website, on a newsletter, whatever, giving that information out. That's also putting up signs very concretely. So again, we'll very much see what has been done as a case example. But it can look like whatever you want it to look like, but I think very proactive physical evidence of something that you're doing. And then there's the other side, which is working with. So you have these communities that are already established, you have green groups, you have friends of parks, you have a lot of things going on in your boroughs already, and it's tapping into those networks and really actually consolidating those networks, but really working with them to, say, have volunteer groups that are going to weed the parks, or volunteer groups that are going to weed your streets, whatever. But really more of that sense of working with and making the most of resources that are actually already there, which, to a side note, can also save you money. That's another little advantage there as councillors, is you're both being more attractive to your residents because you're showing that you're engaging with people and actually really speaking to people on the ground, but you're also actually potentially saving money by not having to maintain so many areas yourselves. So that's sort of the framework that we're working in. And so today we have an example from Lambeth. So Lambeth went pesticide-free in 2020, if I'm right. It's been a sort of a journey, and I know it's still some elements that are ongoing. But yeah, it's a really interesting example because it started from campaigners. So just to add, pesticide-free towns, today we're talking to councillors, this is the side that we're doing, but we also work with campaigners, we also work with the public. There's over 100 campaigns across the country. And if you see it less as an adversarial thing, but actually as people on the ground that are ready to support your decisions, that are ready to help you lead or get the word out. And so that's sort of Incredible Edible Lambeth, who we have Robert Finlay here from, are their own organization that also took on the sort of Pesticide-Free Towns campaign as an element of what they do. And so I'll let him sort of say the journey. And we also have Jason Prentis here from Lambeth Council, who is, to be exact of your title, I wrote it down and then stopped writing halfway through. But an interesting title, I think, because not every council has this, an Education, Communication and Outreach Officer. So I think it kind of speaks to what you were saying from Kristen, of that champion. someone a bit in the middle that's really thinking of the public, thinking how you can engage that. So yeah, Lambeth is an excellent example, and I will let Jason start. Let Robert start.
Just to say, Incredible Edible is a national, I don't know if you know about Incredible Edible, it's a national organisation, and it's got local groups that promote healthy food growing in a sustainable manner and organically, so not using pesticides. And Incredible Edible Lambeth has taken that on for about 10 years now with 500 members. And we've promoted, next slide please, using leaflets that are linked with Pesticide-Free London, and also, next slide, a pledge that that each member is encouraged to fill out, and it's also sent out to councillors. And so we had a great uptake by the councillors. This was about 4 years ago, and including most of the cabinet. But it's taken Lambeth a little bit longer to. So we were working on that for about the last 10 years. But the next slide, please. Lambeth signed up to the declares a climate emergency in January of 2019, one of the first boroughs in the country. And in the parks, glyphosate is no longer used other than for Japanese knotweed and St John's, giant hogweed. And in the estates, they stopped using glyphosate in August of 2020. Next slide. In the streets, they were sprayed 3 times yearly. The council had planned to go pesticide-free with the new change of contracts, which was to be in April of 2021. Because of COVID, that was extended another 6 months. But we started, Janny Bickerstaff and myself went to a meeting of the contractor, and we talked about opting out of our own streets being sprayed, and we've got our neighbours to join in, and we had a successful weeding of our streets, and that was accepted by the council. And as a consequence of that, at a meeting later in that year, 2019, the council actually recognised that opting out may be an option, and they promoted it. And the next year, 30 streets, the figures are not up there, I'm sorry, but 30 streets joined in. We were certainly pushing it within Incredible Edible to get more streets involved. And what we found, it was quite incredible itself, that most people didn't know that glyphosate was being used on the streets. That's changed more recently, and the council's been a bit more open about it, and it's actually on their website that glyphosate's being used. And in the third year, which was 2021, 130 streets joined in weeding their own streets. And as a consequence of that, the council cut short by 1 spraying season. Instead of spraying in the August, because the change of contract was happening in the October, they actually dropped the spraying in the August spraying. Next slide. So there were some interesting findings with that, as I've mentioned, most of the residents that we talked to didn't know that glyphosate was being used. That the recurrence rates, we used a method where we were taking out the roots as well, and that's been reported in other studies where the recurrence rates of actually digging the weeds out with a sharp instrument, if it's between paving slabs, for example, had a much better success rate than even glyphosate, which is why glyphosate needs to be used 3 times, had to be used 3 times a year, because by the time it came around to April, May to August, the weeds were already back. And with our method, we showed a much less recurrence rate. But what was also interesting is we found that the gutters in our streets had a large amount of soil and material that the spraying was only adding to that. They weren't being cleaned properly, and so we had a lot of problems with weeds regrowing back because the gutters, which has been mentioned before by one of the other speakers. Yes. And then next slide. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the tree pits, and that's been quite a success. I had a close working relationship with the tree officer in southern Lambeth and went around lots of walks, heard that the street trees were under a lot of pressure from climate change, from pollution, from cars driving over the roots and bashing into the trees, and they have a tough time. And then you see here that 3 times a year they're sprayed with glyphosate all over. We're talking thousands of trees, and which isn't a pretty look in itself, but that could only add to the challenges the street trees had. So I wrote to the tree officer and said, look, we can't, there's no trip hazard here. There's no, what's the reasoning we're spraying these poor trees, adding to their burden? So he wrote to the contractor, and with only probably a few weeks, we found out that Lambeth was going to stop the spraying of all the street trees. So if there's one message that councillors can go away with is get to know your local tree officer and talk to them and maybe get them to write to the contractor and see if they can at least stop spraying the street trees. And you can even have, last slide please. So you can have, that's actually at the front of my place actually. So it's fairly well looked after. But I just wanted to stress that you can actually do something positive fairly easily and without too much effort. So thank you.
I think I'll change my own slides, might be a bit easier. There is a, oh yeah, you said that, okay, I'll just skip that.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Hi everyone, hello online. I'm Jason Prentis. I'm going to talk to you about our community weeding scheme. I thought I'd open with this picture of a very happy bee, because I stand before you today, a man reborn. Before my first conversation about glyphosate with Robert, I had an attitude about weeds that I think is very similar to a lot of people who work in environmental services in local authorities, which is that sort of entrenched opinion that weeds are bad and we've got to get rid of them. And it's just how we've always done it, isn't it? But now, far from walking down the street and being really upset at seeing weeds everywhere, I'm much more likely to be seen crouching down photographing them. And so here is one of my favourites from this year, a very happy bee enjoying a patch of Viper's bug gloss in a tree pit near Herne Hill Station. And it just kind of highlights how amazing some of these things are when you actually allow things to grow a bit. You get things like this happening, it's amazing. I must remember not to press this one during the slide, because then no one will hear me. So a bit of context, a bit of background. I'm sure you're familiar with Lambeth, many of you have probably holidayed there, but it's a densely populated and diverse inner London borough. We've got 1,100 streets that we look after, which is quite a lot. I'm reliably informed, possibly not that reliably, but I've been informed that if you stretch them all end to end, it would go from here to Lisbon and back. So that's a long way when you think about it. It's a lot of pavement to sweep, a lot of pavement to weed. But if you look at it another way, it's a lot of habitat, potential habitat, where really interesting things can grow. Many of our streets have high footfall, which, as you can imagine, would restrict plant growth to backlines and your channels, so the main part of the pavement where people are actually walking, you don't have anything growing, so you're not worried too much about trip hazards and things like that. And as I say, if you allow things to grow, you can get a very rich variety of wild plants growing on your pavements. And I did a walk with a botanist in the summer, and we found 75 different wild plants just growing in a single street, mainly in tree pits, but some of them in the back line, and it was absolutely fascinating. So a bit of history of glyphosate use, as Robert has said already, we used to spray, we had subcontractors come in and spray 3 applications a year. Each one took 3 weeks to cover the whole borough. You know, we thought that was great. You know, 3 weeks, bish bosh, done, jobs are good. And eventually we adopted a more selective approach. Instead of spraying literally everywhere, we got them just doing where they could actually see. But because already conversations were going on, we were kind of, you know, scoring occasional own goals where they'd go past a community garden and spray it, or they'd go past people's front gardens and spray. And we said, look, guys, come on, be sensible. Just spray what's obviously a weed. And now we you know, they started to avoid deliberate community planting, which was good news for everybody. Bit more background in terms of the work we do with communities in Lambeth. I run a couple of projects. No, it's pressed the microphone. That didn't
It was the display timed out because now.
Oh, is it this one? Oh, boo.
Oh, why is it gone?
Yeah, we've got it online, but we haven't got it here. Is there a button that needs to be pressed somewhere?
Sorry, Jason.
It's definitely the screen.
Yeah.
It's not us, it's them.
Is it really?
Yeah.
This looks too high tech.
I know,
Yeah.
none of us
Wanna touch it?
See that and get my glasses on so I could just talk.
Don't know.
Did that do anything?
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
Well, something's
You did it.
Yes. Well done.
Oh. Amazing. So thank you, Emma. Thank you so much for that. So as I was saying, a couple of projects that I run in Lambeth with communities. Fresh View, first of all, this is quite an old one. We've been doing this for, I think, how long have I been there? It's probably about 13 years, 13, 14 years. So this is where we bring neighbours together in a particular road or an estate to make environmental improvements, and it's very, very much community-led, so a resident will get in touch with us and say, I want to do a Fresh View in my road, please, and we'll say, brilliant. We'll ask them to gather volunteers from among their neighbours, and then I will arrive in a van on a pre-arranged day, normally a Saturday or a Sunday, van load of tools, materials, paint, wood, compost, all the stuff that people need to do the things that they want to do. And they are things like building planters, painting walls. We encourage participation from people of all ages. Now, this is a really good example, a little bit off topic, but I'm sure in your boroughs you've probably got little fly tipping hotspots where you go past every day and there's someone's dumped a fridge or a mattress. So what we do is we build these planters, and we put the planters there instead, and you'd be amazed, hey presto, no more fly tipping. I'm not going to talk about that today, because I'm here to talk about pavement plants, but if anyone wants to know any more about that, I'm sure we can probably provide my email address or something, you can get in touch and I can tell you a bit more about it. But that's a really successful project for us. Also, we started doing these little planters around tree pits, which our tree team got really upset about, because we're not supposed to raise the level of the soil around the trees. We don't do that anymore. We do slightly, the sort of less formal ones that Robert showed you, which is much better for the tree. I probably should have taken that picture out, but never mind. So the other project that I run it was called Street Champions. We were approached by the Institute for Fiscal Studies a few years ago, after about 4 years of, thank you, that's very kind. About 4 years of austerity. In about 2014, the IFS wanted to work with a local authority to find out what we could do to incentivise residents to actually get on board and play more of a role in service provision, and what sort of things could they actually usefully do to help mitigate the impact of to funding local authorities. So we launched in 2015, and then a few years later, in 21, we relaunched as Neighbourhood Champions, which is what it currently is. We wanted to make it more inclusive. Before the change, I think about 5% of our membership lived on estates and the other 95% were street-based. Since we've made the change, of all the new people that have signed up, over 30% of them live on estates, so that's been really, really successful. Just a name can make such a difference, and it's been really beneficial. We've got lots of neighbourhood champions on estates now, so it's great. So those are a couple of the things that we've already been doing. I just wanted to leave this slide in. I know you've heard from Robert talking about Incredible Edible. I needed to leave this in because I cannot overemphasise the role that they played in the changes that took place within myself and my colleagues in terms of our attitude to weeds, and just, you know, our being able to sell the idea of stopping glyphosate to all the people who it needed to be sold to. You know, great campaigner. As I said, you know, at the start of this process, I was all, you know, glyphosate's great, isn't it? It just gets rid of the weeds, it's brilliant. And, you know, I remember one memorable occasion, Robert referred to me as the enemy. Still smart, still smart. But I think we've come out the other side now, and I think our relationship is, you know, much better. But I just wanted to pay tribute to Robert and his colleagues at Incredible Liverpool Lambeth for what they did in terms of helping us to actually get our mindset right. So our contract, our waste and street cleansing contract with Veolia was due to end in April 2021. As you've heard, later deferred until October. And we had committed to stopping using glyphosate at the start of the new contract on streets this season. And in the meantime, to kind of help us transition to that, we gave birth to the community weeding scheme, in which residents volunteered to lead manual weeding of their streets. And in return, we stopped spraying glyphosate on their street. So in signing up, residents were agreeing to actually talking to neighbours and, you know, selling the idea to their neighbours to make sure that people in the road were on board and knew what was going on, and also trying to get some help, because it's, you know, it's quite hard work doing weeding. You want to get a few people out. We were asking people to weed the whole road, unless it's a massive long road. We did have one road opted out in Clapham, which I think was about a mile long, but they still managed to do the whole road. They were just amazing. And they also were agreeing to kind of automatically be enrolled onto our neighbourhood champion scheme, which was a really kind of cheeky way of increasing the number of neighbourhood champions. But no bad thing, because a lot of the people that signed up for the weeding scheme have now gone on to do fresh views, and they've, you know, set up WhatsApp groups for their road, and they've done all sorts of other great stuff. We gave everybody a garden waste bag. We've got a garden waste subscription based service in Lambeth, so you pay a subscription, you get a couple of bags. So we gave everybody a bag for free that they could put their weeds in and put it out next to their bin every week. But we didn't offer any tools. And I was sceptical, I've got to say. When we started the project, I was a little bit sceptical. I said, well, come on, guys, we've got to offer them tools. But they said, no, let's see how it goes. You know, it's a cost. We'll just see how, you know, see how people react. And if people ask for tools, then we can have a conversation. As it went really well. 37 streets volunteered after the first round of publicity. And this was all, you know, it was a fairly quiet launch, to be honest, very soft launch. This was Lambeth Talk magazine, which goes out quarterly. It's our free publication. The council pushes out 4 times a year. And we just had this little advert. We had a 4-page spread to talk about recycling and all sorts of stuff, community projects. We had this little bit at the bottom talking about getting involved in chemical-free weeding. We hadn't even called it the community weeding scheme then. We didn't even give it a name. We did not know at all how many people were going to sign up, but we got 37 in the first round. So then we started promoting it more widely, promoted it to the Neighbourhood Champions group via email newsletter. And I think Robert was promoting it via Incredible Liverpool Lambeth at the same time. So we managed to get the number of participating streets up to 100. Feedback was on the whole positive. Obviously, there were a lot of people who were literally just doing it to get rid of glyphosate. And I need to say that because Robert made that point. It wasn't all about just, you know, people happy getting together doing community stuff. A lot of people, it really was just about stopping the council from using weed killers on their road. But we did get a lot of positive feedback from people. My favourite one was someone saying it's by far the most community-spirited and neighbourly thing they'd experienced in 20 years of living in London. We had another road that had 44 volunteers all went out and did all the weeding on their road. So it was really well received. And then last spring, we did a slightly more hard-hitting advert in Lambeth Talk, where we were a little bit more, you know, explicit about using glyphosate. We made a decision that the glyphosate spray in May last year would be the last. And even after that, some of our volunteers continued to do weeding and still do weeding on their street today. So that was, as I say, a half-page advert in Lambeth Talk. And then this spring, we've completely changed the focus of the project. So before, the idea was residents would exactly mirror what the council was doing with glyphosate in other roads. So when our subcontractors were out spraying, we would ask the weeding volunteers to go out and weed their road and just get rid of everything. And then if anyone hadn't done it, for whatever reason, we would get the contractors in to spray glyphosate when they were just kind of about to leave the borough. Luckily that didn't happen because everyone did it. But now the project is all about nurturing biodiversity. So the idea of it is it's more of a selective weeding approach. So volunteers can take their roads off the weeding schedule, this time a manual weeding schedule obviously, and just let stuff grow. All we ask them to do is take out plants that could be a trip hazard, could be pavement obstruction, or things like Buddleia, Tree of Heaven, Red Valerian, things that can, potentially if they get too big, they can start to damage the pavement, damage people's walls and that sort of thing. Everything else is allowed to grow, and then during the season of, over the autumn, winter, when things have kind of stopped growing, we send the team in to, pull everything out, return everything to spotless, and then next year it all kind of regenerates and rejuvenates. So here's my advert, much more friendly looking, nice little bit of three-cornered garlic, I think that is. QR code as well, gone techie on this one. And so we've produced a manual for volunteers. This explains all about the project, why we control weeds, trip hazards, obstructions, problem plants, how to identify the few problem plants that could potentially damage infrastructure, how to remove them. Some of the common, we didn't want to make this all about just the weeding. We want it to be a project that's got a bit more added value for people as well. So we put a section in there showing some of the interesting plants, some of the really common ones that you'll see on every road, some of the really rare ones that you'll be very, very lucky to see, and how to identify plants. Now, an example of one of the really rare ones is this one called Jersey Cudweed, which is on the red list as being critically endangered. So technically it's an offence to deliberately uproot or pick it or destroy it. But it started growing in a number of places around South London. And when I did my little botany walk with the botanist in the summer, she found this example. So she was delighted to see that. And it's just, it's like I said, it's amazing what you can find if you let things grow and if you've got a bit of time to look. So communications, which I think is one of the key points that we wanted to talk about here. For the new iteration of the scheme, volunteers are given a leaflet to post through their neighbours' letterboxes, which explains all about the project, and it has an email address that I manage, so if people object to it, they can email me, and then I've got an opportunity to explain it in more detail and persuade them why it's a great idea. We've got Correct posters that we'll be fixing to lampposts at each end of the road, so if you don't live in the street and you think, oh, there's a lot of weeds in here, you can actually see what's going on, and it's got a QR code on it again, which takes you to a page on the Lambeth website, all the community weeding scheme pages, but there's also going to be a PDF on there, which is similar to the last part of the manual, shows you all the type of plants that you might see and how to identify them. So this is the leaflet that we give people, I've left that three-cornered garlic, and the bit of explanation about the project there, and then I thought we had maybe it's gone in the wrong order. No. Oh, that was it. Version that had the video on it. But that doesn't matter. I was going to show you a video that our comms team made of our cabinet member for environment that he made, I think, in March, which talked about you'd see more wild plants growing on your pavements because we changed the way that we do weeding, and it showed lots of images from a road in Brixton called Endymion Road, which was part of the weeding scheme, and it had loads of wild plants growing on the pavement, like poppies and all sorts, and they chalked the names of the plants on the pavement, and they'd really, really gone for it. But we can probably send it as a link when you send out the presentations. Yeah. So I think, in that case, I'm done.